After my husband died, I came to my mother's house, thinking that maybe my own people would be my support. But there I was not respected more than a servant. I organized a Thanksgiving party, hoping in my heart that maybe everything would be okay that day. But that night, the words they said to me, they broke something inside me forever. And that's when I decided to take revenge. My name is Naomi Brooks, and I'm 30 years old. There was a time when my world felt complete. Quiet mornings, gentle laughter, and the comforting scent of coffee that my husband, Andre Collins, brewed before I even opened my eyes. We lived in a small but warm apartment on the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours. The walls were covered with photos of us, smiling at a beach, standing under Christmas lights, and holding hands during our first wedding anniversary. Andre used to say, "Home isn't made of bricks, Naomi. It's made of moments." And back then, I believed him completely. Every morning, I'd hear the faint hum of the coffee machine mixing with the sound of rain or city noise. Andre would hand me a cup, kiss my forehead, and tease me for always forgetting to add sugar. He worked as a systems engineer at a logistics firm downtown, and I worked as an accountant for a local business. Our schedules were simple but aligned. We shared dinners, walks, and late-night conversations about the future. We used to dream about buying a little house with a porch swing, maybe near a park, where we'd grow old together. I never realized how fragile those dreams were until the night everything changed. That day had started like any other, a regular Thursday, filled with calls, spreadsheets, and lunch leftovers. I remember texting Andre around 5 in the evening, "Pick up milk on your way home." He replied with his usual heart emoji. Just a few hours later, my phone rang again, but this time it wasn't Andre. It was a voice I didn't recognize, a man from the emergency department at St. Clair's Hospital. His tone was too calm, too rehearsed. I still remember his words, "Ma'am, your husband has been in an accident. You need to come immediately." My heart dropped so hard I could barely breathe. I grabbed my coat, keys, and wallet without realizing what I was doing. The world blurred around me as I drove through the rain, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I reached the hospital, the smell of antiseptic hit me first, cold, sharp, lifeless. A nurse guided me down a long hallway. The sound of my own footsteps echoed louder than my heartbeat. I remember the white fluorescent lights, the hum of machines, and the faint voices of doctors behind closed doors. When they finally took me into the room, I saw Andre lying still, covered up to his chest, his skin pale against the white sheets. The doctor was speaking, but the words didn't make sense. "We did everything we could, internal bleeding. He didn't make it." For a few seconds, I couldn't hear anything. The world muted itself. My knees gave out, and I fell beside the bed, clutching his hand. It was cold, but I held on anyway, whispering his name again and again. "Andre, please. We still have plans. You can't leave me." But silence was the only thing that answered back. The next few days passed like a fog. People came, said things that were supposed to be comforting, and left. I don't even remember the funeral clearly, just black clothes, flowers, and the endless sound of rain hitting umbrellas. I stood beside his casket feeling like I was outside my own body. The woman who had once laughed with him, dreamed with him, wasn't me anymore. She was gone with him. I stopped cooking, stopped answering calls, and sat for hours staring at the empty couch where he used to sit. The apartment felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories that refused to fade. Every sound reminded me of what I'd lost. Even silence hurt. Nights were the worst. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. reaching for him, expecting his warmth beside me. Sometimes I'd talk to him like he could still hear me. "Remember that porch swing we talked about?" I'd whisper, "I guess it'll just be me now." The grief came in waves, sometimes soft, sometimes violent, but it never truly stopped. I tried going back to work, pretending to function, but inside I was falling apart. My co-workers avoided mentioning his name, as if silence could protect me. But it didn't. Nothing could. After a few weeks, I started feeling physically unwell. My body felt heavy, my energy gone. I blamed it on exhaustion and grief. There were days I couldn't even get out of bed. My appetite disappeared, and I found myself losing weight without trying. My friends urged me to see a doctor, but I didn't want to. I was tired of hospitals, tired of bad news. I thought maybe I was just mourning too deeply, that my body was reacting to heartbreak. But even heartbreak shouldn't make you faint. Then one morning, I collapsed while pouring water into a glass. I woke up on the living room floor, dizzy, disoriented, with the taste of metal in my mouth. That was the moment I realized something was wrong. The next day, I finally went to see my family doctor. Sitting in that sterile room, surrounded by the soft ticking of the wall clock, I felt like I was living the same nightmare again, waiting for bad news. The doctor came in, flipping through my test results. He looked at me, then smiled softly. "Naomi," he said, "I think you should sit down." My heart started racing. I gripped the edge of the chair, bracing myself for another blow. "You're not sick," he continued gently. "You're pregnant." The word echoed through the room like thunder. Pregnant. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. My eyes filled with tears that came faster than I could stop them. "That can't be," I whispered. "My husband, he's gone." The doctor nodded, his expression kind but unchanging. "I know," he said. "But this is his child, Naomi. Congratulations." I walked out of the clinic numb, clutching the ultrasound report against my chest. The cold air hit my face as I stepped outside, but I barely felt it. I stood on the sidewalk, tears blurring the city lights. I wanted to scream, to laugh, to cry all at once. I looked up at the gray sky and whispered, "You didn't leave me completely, did you, Andre?" A small part of me, the part that had been dying, suddenly felt alive again. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because the pain was gone, but because life, in its strange way, had given me one last piece of him to hold on to. The days after I found out I was pregnant felt unreal. I would wake up every morning expecting it to be a dream, expecting to find Andre sitting on the edge of the bed teasing me about oversleeping. But reality had a cruel way of reminding me where I stood. His side of the bed remained empty, his toothbrush untouched, his voice gone. Yet inside me, something of him still lived, and that thought was both comforting and terrifying. Every time I touched my stomach, I felt a strange mix of gratitude and fear. Gratitude, because I wasn't entirely alone. Fear, because I didn't know how I would do this, how I would raise a child in a world that had already taken everything from me. I remember sitting by the window one evening, holding the ultrasound report in my hands. The faint outline on the paper looked like nothing and everything at once. It was proof of life, proof that Andre's love hadn't vanished, it had simply changed form. I whispered to the little life inside me, "You don't know it yet, but you've already saved me." The city outside was wrapped in winter gray, and for the first time since Andre's death, I felt something that resembled peace. It didn't last long, but it was enough to remind me I could still feel something other than pain. The first few weeks were hard. I was still working at the firm, and morning sickness hit me like waves. I tried to hide it from everyone. My boss was kind, but I didn't want pity or questions about how I was coping. I kept my head down and worked quietly, taking breaks in the bathroom when nausea overwhelmed me. When I got home, the silence of the apartment was unbearable. I'd sometimes sit in Andre's old chair, wrapping myself in his jacket, pretending he was still there. The loneliness felt heavier now, not just for myself, but for the child who would grow up never knowing him. The expenses began piling up quickly. Doctor visits, vitamins, rent, all of it. My savings were running low because Andre and I had been planning to buy a house, not prepare for one of us to die. I tried not to panic, but every bill felt like another weight pressing down on me. There were nights I couldn't sleep, my mind spinning with worry. I'd place my hand over my belly and whisper, "Don't worry, baby. I'll figure it out." Saying it out loud was my way of convincing myself it was true. As the months passed, I realized I couldn't keep living in that apartment. Every corner of it was soaked in memories. The sound of the elevator outside the door, the faint hum of the street below, it all reminded me of him. It wasn't home anymore, it was a museum of grief. I needed a change, even if I didn't know where to go. That's when I thought of my mother. My mother, Loretta Brooks, lived in the same neighborhood I grew up in. a small, aging house with faded paint and a porch that creaked when you stepped on it. She lived there with my younger sister, Keisha, who was in her final year of college. We hadn't been close for years, but after Andre's death, my mother had called a few times to check in. Her voice had sounded softer than I remembered, and for a moment I believed maybe things could be different now. So one Sunday afternoon, I packed a few bags, gathered the most important things, Andre's watch, our photo frame, and the baby's first ultrasound, and drove to her house. When I arrived, my mother opened the door wearing her usual housecoat and an expression that I couldn't quite read. For a second, there was silence between us, and then she stepped forward and hugged me. "You look tired," she said. Her tone wasn't cruel, just blunt, the way it had always been. I nodded and smiled weakly. "It's been a lot, Mom." Keisha appeared behind her, looking at me with mild surprise before grinning. "Wow, Naomi, you're actually here. I thought you'd stay in that apartment forever." Her words stung, but I forced a smile. They welcomed me inside, and for the first few days, things felt okay. My mother cooked dinner, Keisha helped me carry my bags, and they both promised they'd be there for me. I thought maybe this was what healing looked like, family coming together after tragedy. I tried to believe it. But small cracks began to appear quickly. My mother started leaving unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, sighing loudly when I sat down to eat. "I just don't know how I'm supposed to manage everything on my own," she would mutter. I knew what she wanted. So I started covering the bills. Then it was the grocery shopping. Then Keisha's tuition. It happened slowly, almost naturally, until I realized I was handling everything. At first, I didn't mind. Helping them made me feel useful again. It gave me purpose. But my pregnancy was becoming harder. Some mornings, I could barely stand without getting dizzy. When I asked Keisha to help with the laundry one day, she rolled her eyes. "You're not the only one who's tired, Naomi. I have classes, remember?" My mother overheard and added, "Don't start arguments, Naomi. You're lucky we let you stay here." Those words hit me harder than I expected. Lucky. I wanted to say, but instead, I swallowed my pride and stayed quiet. Weeks turned into months, and the dynamic in the house shifted. I wasn't a guest, I was their provider. I'd wake up early, make breakfast for everyone, go to work, come home, and cook again. The baby inside me was growing, but the warmth around me was fading. My mother barely asked how I felt. Keisha was always on her phone or complaining about her studies. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit on the porch holding my belly and whisper, "It's just us, sweetheart. Just you and me." Still, despite everything, I told myself I could handle it. I believed that once the baby arrived, maybe they'd change. Maybe seeing him or her would soften their hearts. I didn't realize that the road ahead would demand far more from me than I had ever imagined. The grief that had begun with Andre's death wasn't over, it was only changing shape. And I had no idea that the very people I was sacrificing for would one day treat me like I was nothing more than their servant. But for now, I held on to hope, the tiny, flickering kind that lives between heartbreak and survival, and I promised my unborn child that I wouldn't let the world break me again. I used to think that living with family would heal the loneliness that Andre's death had carved into me, but I was wrong. The warmth I expected from my mother and sister never came. Instead, the house that was supposed to feel like home slowly began to feel like another burden I couldn't escape. My mornings started before the sun rose. Not because I wanted to, but because someone had to make breakfast, wash dishes, and iron uniforms before leaving for work. My mother, Loretta, rarely lifted a hand to help. She had always been strong-willed and proud, but after I moved in, her pride turned into something sharper, colder. "If you're up already, make some tea for me," she would call from her room while I packed my work bag. I obeyed without question. I didn't want conflict. I told myself, this is temporary. At work, I tried to keep my head above water. My belly was beginning to show, and my coworkers were kind enough to pretend they didn't notice how often I stepped away to breathe. I was tired, physically and emotionally, but I forced myself to keep going. Every paycheck I earned seemed to disappear the moment I got it. Loretta's medical bills, Keisha's tuition, groceries, and household repairs all fell on me. I convinced myself that this was love, that taking care of my family was my way of honoring Andre's memory. But love should never feel like servitude, and mine did. Keisha, my younger sister, was nothing like me. She was bright, carefree, and a little spoiled, traits that Loretta encouraged. She loved to talk about her future, her classes, and the people she met. "Naomi, you don't get it," she said one evening while scrolling through her phone. "Life's about moving forward. You can't keep holding on to the past." I wanted to tell her that my past wasn't something I could simply set down. It was my entire world, now reduced to memories. Instead, I just smiled weakly and said, "You're right." I learned early on that agreeing was easier than arguing. At night, I'd lie awake in the small room my mother had given me. It used to be a storage space, still crowded with old boxes and the faint smell of mothballs. There was barely enough space for my bed and a dresser. The walls were thin, and I could hear every argument between my mother and sister, usually about money. "Ask Naomi," Loretta would say. "She has a job." It hurt to know I had become their solution for everything. The part that stung most was that they didn't even thank me. If anything, they made me feel like I owed them. "You're lucky to have a roof over your head," my mother reminded me once when I hesitated to pay another bill. Lucky. The word clung to me like a curse. One Sunday, I made breakfast for everyone: pancakes, eggs, and orange juice, hoping to bring back a little warmth. Loretta barely touched her plate. "Too sweet," she said, frowning. Keisha didn't look up from her phone. "You know, Naomi," she muttered, "you should stop cooking like you're feeding one of your clients. We're not impressed." Her tone was half joking, but her smirk told me she meant every word. I laughed softly to hide the sting. That became my habit, to turn hurt into silence. My pregnancy advanced faster than I realized. Some mornings, I would wake up with sharp back pain, struggling to stand. My hands would swell, and I could barely keep my balance. When I mentioned this to Loretta, she sighed. "You're just looking for excuses not to work. Women have been having babies forever. Stop being dramatic." Her words cut deeper than she knew. I wanted to tell her I wasn't being dramatic. I was scared. I had no partner, no emotional support, no safety net. But my mother didn't believe in weakness, and in her eyes, pain was weakness. One afternoon, I came home early from work feeling faint. The summer heat was unbearable, and my clothes clung to my skin. I opened the door quietly, hoping to rest before dinner. But as I stepped inside, I heard my name, whispered sharply from the kitchen. "She's not going anywhere, Keisha," Loretta said. "As long as she's here, she'll keep paying for everything." Keisha laughed. "Yeah, but what if she decides to move out after the baby? Then what?" My mother's response was cold. "Then we make sure she doesn't." I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding so loud I thought they'd hear it. I backed away slowly, trying to breathe. That night, I couldn't eat. The food on my plate tasted bitter. I looked across the table at the two women I called family and wondered when they had stopped seeing me as a person. Maybe they never did. Maybe I was just convenient. A wallet, a caretaker, a body that worked while they rested. I excused myself early and went to my room, closing the door behind me as quietly as possible. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my swollen stomach. "It's okay," I whispered. "We'll be okay." My baby kicked softly, as if responding, and for a moment, I believed it. But the next morning, everything felt heavier. I went to work and stared at the computer screen for hours, unable to focus. My boss asked if I was all right. "Just tired," I said. It wasn't a lie. I was tired, of pretending, of giving, of hoping that love could fix people who didn't want to be fixed. When I got home that evening, Loretta handed me an envelope. "The electricity bill came in higher this month," she said flatly. "You might want to check if your job gives bonuses for holidays." I nodded silently and took the envelope. Keisha added, "Oh, and I need new textbooks. I'll send you the link." My throat tightened, but I said nothing. I walked to my room, shut the door, and finally allowed myself to cry. I cried for Andre, for the life we never got to live, and for the love I was giving to people who couldn't even see it. Later that night, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My face looked older, my eyes dull. But when I placed my hand on my belly, I felt something stir inside me, a reminder that life still existed, even here, even in this suffocating place. I don't know how, I whispered to the quiet room, but I'll find a way out. For you. I didn't know when or how that would happen, but deep down, I sensed it. Something inside me was shifting, the slow awakening of a strength I didn't yet understand. If anyone had told me that love could become a trap, I wouldn't have believed them. I thought that giving more meant receiving more, that kindness could melt even the hardest hearts. But the truth was colder than that. My kindness had turned into a currency that everyone around me had learned to spend freely. Each day in my mother's house began and ended the same way, with exhaustion. I'd wake before sunrise, my lower back aching, to cook breakfast and pack lunches for everyone. Then I'd walk to the bus stop, my swollen feet pressing painfully inside old shoes, to catch the early ride downtown for work. By the time I came home, the house would be in chaos, unwashed dishes, laundry piled high, and Keisha sprawled on the couch scrolling through her phone. My mother would complain that I didn't bring home enough groceries or that I'd forgotten to pick up her prescriptions. "You know how hard it is for me to walk," she'd scold, as if my own aching body didn't matter. I'd just nod and start cleaning, too tired to argue. Money disappeared faster than I could earn it. Rent, bills, medicines, tuition. It all slipped away like water through my fingers. The few dollars left over went toward my prenatal vitamins or small things for the baby. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit in bed with the bills spread out around me, my calculator in one hand and tears in the other. I kept thinking that if I managed it right, things would get better. I didn't realize that some people don't want better, they just want more. Keisha's demands grew bolder. One evening, she came into my room without knocking, holding her phone. "Naomi, I need $300 for my project. It's due next week." I looked up from my laptop, startled. "Keisha, I just paid your tuition bill." She shrugged. "And? You're working, aren't you? You act like you're broke." I tried to stay calm. "I'm not broke, but I have to save for the baby too." Her face twisted into annoyance. "Oh please. You've been milking that baby excuse for months. It's not even here yet." Before I could respond, she stormed out. Her door slammed, and the echo of it made my chest ache. I stared at the empty hallway for a long time, wondering how my own sister could sound so much like a stranger. That night, I sat on the porch with my hands on my belly. The air smelled like rain. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the hum of distant traffic. "I'm trying," I whispered to the child inside me. "I'm trying so hard." I imagined André sitting beside me, his arm around my shoulder, telling me everything would be fine. But all I had was the wind and my own heartbeat. The next morning, I fainted in the kitchen. I don't remember hitting the floor. Only the sound of Keisha screaming for our mother and the sharp smell of vinegar they waved under my nose to wake me up. When I opened my eyes, Loretta was standing over me, arms crossed. "You need to eat more," she said flatly. "You can't afford to be weak." Then she walked away. No concern, no softness, just irritation. Keisha, on the other hand, looked uncomfortable, maybe even guilty, but she said nothing. She helped me to the couch and went back to her phone. I realized then that in this house, compassion was a foreign language. A few days later, my boss called me into his office. He was kind, but his tone was cautious. "Naomi," he said, "you've been doing good work, but you seem distracted lately. Is everything all right at home?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say I was fine. But the truth spilled out of me before I could stop it. I lost my husband a few months ago. And I'm pregnant. It's been hard. He nodded slowly, the kind of nod people give when they don't know what to say. "Take care of yourself," he said finally. "We'll manage if you need a few days." I thanked him and walked out, my throat tight. His pity was well-intentioned, but it still made me feel smaller. Like a burden even at work, the one place I thought I was still strong. When I got home that evening, Loretta was sitting in the living room watching TV. "Did you pick up my prescription?" she asked without looking up. "I didn't have time," I said quietly. "I'll get it tomorrow." She turned to glare at me. You always have excuses, Naomi. You used to be so dependable. Ever since that husband of yours died, you've turned lazy. The words hit me like a slap. My hands trembled, but I said nothing. I walked past her, into the kitchen, and began washing the dishes that weren't even mine. I kept scrubbing until my hands burned from the hot water. Maybe if I worked harder, I thought, she'd stop hating me. A few nights later, Keisha brought friends over without warning. The house filled with loud music and laughter. I was lying in bed, exhausted, when I heard them joking about me. Your sister's basically your mom's servant, one of them said, laughing. She's paying for all of this, right? Keisha didn't deny it. She just laughed along. My heart sank. I turned off the lamp and stared into the darkness, my eyes burning. The next morning, I decided to skip work. My body couldn't take another day of pretending. I spent the morning cleaning up after Keisha's friends, picking up empty bottles and crumpled napkins. Loretta came into the kitchen mid-afternoon and frowned. Did you call the electric company? The bill's overdue. I froze. I had forgotten. I'll do it tomorrow, I said quickly. She rolled her eyes. You never do anything right, Naomi. If your husband were still alive, he'd be ashamed to see you like this. Something inside me cracked. I turned to face her, tears spilling before I could stop them. You don't get to talk about him, I said, my voice shaking. You don't know what it's like to lose everything and still be told you're not enough. For the first time in months, Loretta was silent. She just stared at me, lips pressed tight. Then she turned away, muttering under her breath, "Don't raise your voice at me in my house." I went to my room and cried until my chest hurt. Every tear carried months of silence, frustration, and heartbreak. When the sobs finally stopped, I wiped my face and looked around the small room. My reflection in the window looked tired but stronger somehow. You're not weak, I whispered to myself. You're surviving. That night, as I lay in bed with my hand on my belly, I felt the baby kick for the first time. A tiny flutter, soft but unmistakable. I gasped, then smiled through my tears. It was as if Andre himself had reached out through this little life to tell me to keep going. We're going to be okay, I whispered. For the first time in a long while, I actually believed it. I didn't know how, but I felt a shift deep inside me, a quiet determination that no matter how much they took, they would never take the last piece of me. Thanksgiving was approaching, and for weeks, the thought of it filled me with both hope and fear. I'd spent so many holidays surrounded by silence and bitterness since Andre's death, and something inside me longed for one day of peace. One day where my family could sit together without turning love into a weapon. I told myself that if I made this Thanksgiving perfect, maybe things would finally change. Maybe my mother would smile at me again, and my sister would stop seeing me as an inconvenience. I wanted to believe that family still meant something. So I started planning early. Every evening after work, I made lists, groceries, decorations, desserts. I wanted the house to feel warm, full of life, full of something other than resentment. My paycheck was small, but I stretched it carefully, choosing ingredients that would make everything look rich even if it wasn't. I even took an advance on my salary to make it happen. When I told my mother I was organizing the dinner, she didn't argue. She simply shrugged and said, "Do what you want. But don't expect me to lift a finger." For the next 2 weeks, I worked non-stop. I woke up before dawn to clean the house, polish the old dining table, and buy ingredients from the market before work. The smell of spices clung to my clothes, and my feet ached from standing too long, but I didn't stop. I wanted everything to be perfect. Maybe I was chasing the impossible, trying to buy love with effort, but I didn't care. Hope can make fools of us all, and I was already too far gone. On Thanksgiving morning, the house buzzed with the sounds of preparation. I basted the turkey, arranged the side dishes, and ironed the tablecloth that hadn't been used since my father died years ago. My mother sat on the couch watching TV, occasionally barking out suggestions. "You're using too much butter," or "that plate doesn't match the others." Keisha lounged in her room, scrolling through her phone, offering comments like, "You're trying too hard, Naomi. It's just dinner." I ignored them both. I wasn't doing it for their praise. I was doing it because I needed to feel something other than pain. By noon, The table looked beautiful. Golden turkey in the center, bowls of mashed potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, everything perfectly arranged. I set out candles and folded napkins into tiny triangles the way André used to when we hosted our own dinners. The memory of him made my throat tighten, but I smiled through it. This was my way of keeping him close. Around 3, guests began arriving. A few family friends, an old neighbor, and to my surprise, Grandmother Gloria, who had driven from South Carolina just to be here. When she walked in, the air seemed to shift. She was dressed in her usual floral dress and shawl, her silver hair pinned neatly, her eyes sharp but kind. My, she said, looking around. This house hasn't smelled this good in years. She hugged me tightly, her arms warm and strong. You've done all this, haven't you? She whispered. I nodded, and she smiled softly. You've got your father's spirit, Naomi. Always giving, even when no one deserves it. Her words almost broke me. As evening fell, everyone gathered around the table. The soft glow of candles reflected off the glasses, and for a brief moment, it actually felt like family. I sat near the end, my hands folded in my lap, trying to ignore the dull ache in my back. My mother was in her element, chatting loudly, taking credit for the feast. It was such a busy week, she said with a sigh, but I managed to pull this together. A few guests complimented her cooking, and she accepted their praise without hesitation. I bit my lip and stayed quiet. It wasn't the first time she had taken credit for my work. It wouldn't be the last. Then, it happened. As everyone began serving themselves, I slowly moved my chair to sit down beside my grandmother. Before I could even touch the chair, my mother's voice cut through the laughter like a knife. Naomi, she snapped. The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward me. Since when do maids sit with guests? She said sharply. Go make sure the gravy isn't burning. My entire body went cold. The words stung so deeply I could hardly breathe. I wanted to believe she was joking, but the disgust in her tone told me otherwise. I looked at her, my own mother, and saw no remorse, no embarrassment. Only pride. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, and Keisha tried to hide a smirk. My hands trembled as I stood up. I started to say, but she interrupted. Don't argue with me in front of people. You've already done enough. In that moment, something inside me broke. The house I had cleaned, the food I had cooked, the love I had tried to rebuild, all of it crumbled around me. My eyes burned, but I refused to let her see me cry. I turned and quietly walked toward the kitchen. The sound of forks clinking against plates resumed, and conversation slowly returned, but the laughter felt forced, hollow. I leaned against the counter, my stomach tightening, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't notice that my grandmother had followed me until I heard her voice behind me. Naomi. I turned to see her standing there, her expression a mix of sorrow and fury. How long have they been treating you this way? She asked quietly. My lips trembled. It's fine, Grandma, I whispered. I don't want to cause a scene. She took a step closer, her eyes glistening. You already have a scene, child. You're just the only one bleeding from it. Before I could stop her, she marched back into the dining room. Loretta Brooks. Her voice boomed through the air. Everyone froze. My mother looked startled. Mother, what? She began, but Grandma Gloria slammed her palm on the table. You should be ashamed of yourself, she said, her voice shaking with anger. This girl, your daughter, kept a roof over your head, paid your bills, and carried your burdens while carrying a child of her own. And this is how you repay her? By humiliating her in front of strangers. The room fell into stunned silence. Loretta's face turned red, and she stammered, I don't know what you're talking about. But Grandma cut her off. Don't lie to me. I've seen enough to know what kind of woman you've become. You've forgotten compassion, Loretta. You've forgotten how to love. For the first time in months, I saw my mother speechless. Keisha's face had gone pale, and the guests sat frozen, unsure whether to stay or leave. I stood in the doorway, tears streaming down my face, unable to move. Grandma turned toward me, her tone softening. You hear me, Naomi? You've done enough. You don't owe them anything. Something shifted in that moment, something powerful and irreversible. I realized she was right. I had given until there was nothing left to give. My silence had bought their comfort, but it had cost me my dignity. And as I looked at my grandmother's trembling hands, defending me when no one else ever had, I made a silent promise to myself. This would be the last time anyone humiliated me for loving too much. That Thanksgiving dinner, meant to bring family together, had instead exposed the truth I'd been too afraid to see. Love without respect isn't love at all, it's bondage. And that night, for the first time, I began to think about what freedom might look like. That night, after everyone had gone and the laughter had long faded from the walls, the house was thick with silence. My mother hadn't said another word after my grandmother's outburst. She had stayed seated for a long time, pretending to check her phone while the guests awkwardly finished their meals, then slipped into her room without even glancing my way. Keisha had done the same. The only person who lingered was Grandmother Gloria. She helped me quietly clear the table, her movements slow but steady. The smell of roasted turkey and candle wax still hung in the air, but to me it all felt spoiled, as if something sacred had rotted. As we gathered the plates, she looked at me and said softly, "You can't keep living like this, Naomi." Her voice was calm, but behind it I could hear years of wisdom and disappointment. "I know," I whispered, stacking dirty dishes into the sink. "But what choice do I have? I don't want to start a fight. They're still my family." She sighed, leaning heavily on the counter. "Family doesn't mean people who share your blood. It means people who don't make you bleed." Her words pierced something deep in me. I turned to her, my throat tight. "Grandma, I just want them to love me. I keep thinking if I give enough, they'll see how much I care." She placed a trembling hand on my shoulder. "Child, you're trying to fill an empty cup that was never meant to hold your love. Some hearts are holes, not vessels." I stood there for a long time after she went to bed, staring out the window. The night sky was a blur of clouds, and my reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered. For months, I had been shrinking, bending myself into smaller shapes to fit into a world that didn't want me. But something inside me was changing now. I could feel it, the slow burn of defiance where guilt used to live. When I went to my room, I found a folded note on the bed. My grandmother must have left it. Her handwriting was shaky but clear. "You are stronger than they ever made you believe. Start living for yourself before your kindness kills you." I read those words over and over until tears blurred the ink. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel weak for crying. The tears didn't come from pain this time, they came from clarity. I finally understood that I had been living on borrowed strength, giving everything away in the hope that someone would return a fraction of it. But they never would. They didn't know how. The next morning, I woke early. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. My body ached from standing so long the night before, but my mind felt strangely sharp. I walked to the living room, where my mother sat sipping coffee, scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed. "Well, look who's awake early," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You made quite the scene last night." I wanted to tell her that she was the one who made the scene, that she was the one who turned kindness into shame. But instead, I said quietly, "It won't happen again." She smirked, misunderstanding. "Good. I was worried you were starting to act like your grandmother, dramatic and stubborn." I didn't respond. I just stood there for a moment watching her, really watching her. The lines on her face, the bitterness in her tone, the way she took and took without even noticing. I realized then that I had spent my entire life waiting for her approval, and she had never once given it freely. When I went to work later that morning, my body moved through the motions, reports, calls, numbers, but my heart was somewhere else. Every keystroke echoed like a drumbeat in my head, enough. 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 When I got home that evening, my grandmother was already packing her things to leave. "You're leaving tonight?" I asked, my chest tightening. "The roads will be dark." She smiled gently. "Don't worry, child. I've driven through darker things than night." She paused, looking at me with that same piercing gaze she'd had since I was little. "Promise me something, Naomi." "What?" I asked. Promise me you'll stop mistaking silence for peace. I couldn't speak for a moment. Then I nodded. I promise. She kissed my forehead, whispered a prayer under her breath, and left. The sound of her car fading down the road felt like a door closing behind me, one life ending so another could begin. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about every sacrifice, every insult I had swallowed to keep the illusion of love alive. I thought about André, how he used to tell me, "You don't have to be everyone's savior." I had never understood what he meant until now. I wasn't saving anyone, I was saving them from themselves while they drowned me. The next morning, something in me had shifted completely. I didn't announce anything. I didn't cry. I just acted. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, opened my bank app, and started clicking. One by one, I cancelled every automatic transfer to my mother's account. The bills, the payments, even the tuition fees I had been covering for Keisha. My hands shook, but I kept going. When I was done, I sent an email to my HR department updating my banking details and locking down access to my personal accounts. Keisha came into the kitchen mid-morning, yawning. "What are you doing?" she asked, pouring herself orange juice. "Just handling finances," I said calmly. She shrugged, uninterested. "Good. Mom said we need to pay the water bill today. Can you send it?" I closed the laptop gently. "No," I said. She froze, blinking. "What?" I said, "No, Keisha. From now on, you and Mom can handle your own bills." Her jaw dropped. "You can't be serious. You're the only one with a steady job. What are we supposed to do?" "Figure it out," I replied quietly. "That's what I've been doing for all of us." She stormed off, shouting for our mother, who came in seconds later, furious. "What's this nonsense I hear about you cutting us off?" "It's not nonsense," I said, meeting her eyes. "I've been paying for everything, your medicine, your groceries, your daughter's tuition, while you've treated me like a stranger. I'm done." Her face twisted with anger. "You ungrateful girl. After everything I've done for you." I laughed bitterly. "What have you done, Mom? You gave me a roof, yes. But what's the use of a roof when it's built on humiliation?" For a moment, she looked stunned. Then her voice rose. "You'll regret this, Naomi. No one walks away from family." I stood tall, my heart pounding but steady. "I'm not walking away from family," I said. "I'm walking toward peace." Without another word, I turned and walked to my room, packed a small suitcase, and called my grandmother. When she answered, I said only 3 words, "Can I come?" Her voice was warm and unwavering. "The door's already open." That afternoon, I left my mother's house, not as a daughter running away, but as a woman reclaiming her life. The air outside felt different, lighter, as if even the wind was proud of me. For the first time in years, I wasn't scared. I was free. I will never forget the sound of the front door closing behind me that day, the soft click that echoed like freedom. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but it carried the weight of every insult, every sleepless night, every sacrifice I had made in that house. My suitcase was light, I didn't take much. A few clothes, André's photo, the ultrasound image, and the note Grandma Gloria had written me, "Start living for yourself before your kindness kills you." That was all I needed. As I stepped outside, the cold autumn air hit my face, sharp and fresh, like a slap from the universe saying, "Wake up, Naomi. It's time." Grandma's house sat at the edge of town, small, quiet, surrounded by tall oak trees that swayed gently in the wind. When I arrived, she was already standing at the door as if she'd been waiting the whole time. "There you are, child," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Come in before you catch a chill." I walked inside, and for the first time in months, I felt warmth that wasn't just from the heater. It was the warmth of being wanted. Her home smelled of cinnamon and old wood polish. The furniture was worn but clean, the walls lined with photographs of family, some smiling, some faded with time. She guided me to the kitchen table, where a pot of tea was already steaming. "You look exhausted," she said, pouring me a cup. "Drink this. You need rest more than anything." I sat down, my hands still shaking. "Grandma," I whispered, I can't believe I really left. She reached over and took my hand, her skin soft and wrinkled. Of course you can. You just didn't know you were strong enough. For the first few days, I slept more than I talked. My body seemed to shut down the moment I didn't have to be alert anymore. The constant tension that had been my companion for months began to fade slowly. Every morning, I woke to the sound of birds instead of shouting, and each time I looked around I reminded myself, I was safe. Grandma didn't pry or lecture me. She just let me exist. Some evenings, we'd sit on the porch together, sipping tea, watching the sun melt behind the trees. She'd talk about my late grandfather, about love, about the importance of peace over pride. You can rebuild anything, she'd say, but you can't rebuild yourself once you've let them break you. I started working remotely from her house, focusing on my job again for the first time without constant distractions. I felt lighter, more focused. For the first time in months, I started budgeting for my life, not for someone else's comfort. I opened a new savings account and called my HR department to make sure no one but me had access to it. That same evening, I made a list of all the expenses I'd been carrying for my mother and sister, rent, bills, tuition, and crossed each one out, one by one. Each stroke of the pen felt like breaking another invisible chain around my neck. One afternoon, as I was organizing papers for work, Grandma came into my room holding her phone. "There's something you should see," she said. She showed me a post my mother had made on social media. A long, dramatic message about how her ungrateful daughter had abandoned her and left her to suffer in her old age. The comments were full of sympathy. People called her a saint, a strong single mother who had sacrificed everything. Keisha had commented too, "We tried everything. Some people just don't value family." My stomach turned. How can they twist everything like that? I whispered. Grandma sighed. Because people like that can't survive without attention. They'll play the victim as long as there's someone to listen. I put the phone down and pressed my palms against my eyes, trying not to cry. But instead of despair, what I felt this time was anger, not wild or loud but steady and cold. "I'm done being quiet," I said softly. Grandma nodded approvingly. "Then stop being." That evening, I called a lawyer, Marcus Bennett, a kind and sharp-minded man recommended by one of Grandma's friends. When I met him the next day, I explained everything, the financial control, the manipulation, the lies spreading online. He listened without interrupting, taking notes. When I finished, he said, "You've already done the hardest part, leaving. Now it's about protecting what's yours." He helped me file legal documents to ensure that my finances and property were secure, and advised me on how to handle the false claims without escalating the situation. "People like your mother feed on conflict," he said. "Starve them with truth and silence until the truth speaks louder than their noise." I followed every piece of his advice. I changed my contact number, blocked both my mother and sister, and made sure all communication went through my lawyer. It felt strange at first, cutting ties with people I'd spent my life trying to please, but also liberating. Weeks passed, and I found myself growing stronger, physically and emotionally. My pregnancy was progressing, and every time the baby kicked, it reminded me that my life wasn't over. It was just beginning. Grandma would sometimes rest her hand on my stomach and smile. "This child," she'd say, "is going to know love that isn't laced with pain." One evening, as I was making dinner, I noticed the sunset glowing through the window, painting the kitchen golden. Grandma was humming softly to herself as she set the table. I suddenly realized how different this home felt, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. There were no expectations here, no conditions for love. Just two souls who had survived their own storms, finding peace in each other's presence. After dinner, we sat on the porch again, the air cool and still. I looked up at the stars, the same ones André used to point out when we'd lie on the grass talking about the future. I whispered, "I did it, André. I finally got out." And for the first time, the wind didn't feel empty. It felt like an answer, soft, reassuring, proud. That night, before going to bed, I took one last look at myself in the mirror. My face was fuller now, my eyes steadier. I saw a woman who had lost everything and somehow found herself again in the wreckage. I placed my hand on my belly and smiled. We're safe, I whispered. We're home. I turned off the light, crawled into bed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept without fear. No shouting. No guilt. No waking up to the sound of someone else's demands. Just peace, the kind I had once thought was a luxury, but now knew was my right. Peace never comes without its tests. I learned that quickly. For a while, living with Grandma Gloria felt like a quiet miracle. Mornings began with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of gospel humming from the kitchen. I had started working steadily again, organizing accounts for a small consulting firm that allowed remote work. Life was still simple, but it finally felt like it belonged to me. Every time I looked around that cozy little home filled with photographs and sunlight, I thanked God for a second chance. But peace, I discovered, often makes people angry, especially those who've built their lives on your suffering. It started with the phone calls. Unknown numbers at first. I ignored them, but they kept coming. Then the messages, random numbers texting things like, "How could you do that to your mother?" Or "You left her to die." At first, I thought they were spam until one message said, "We all know what kind of daughter you are, Naomi Brooks." That name. That tone. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly where it was coming from. When I finally checked social media after weeks of avoiding it, my heart sank. My mother, Loretta, had gone public, posting long emotional videos claiming I had stolen from her, abandoned her when she was ill, and even implied that I had used her for money before running off. The videos were filled with tears and dramatics. She knew how to perform pain. Her words were powerful enough to fool anyone who didn't know the truth. The comments section was full of sympathy for her. People called her a strong mother, a victim of an ungrateful daughter. And of course, Keisha was there, commenting supportive messages under every post, adding her own side of the story. My chest felt heavy. I turned off my phone and sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. "Grandma," I whispered, "they're destroying my name." She came into the room when she heard my voice and sat beside me, her expression calm but fierce. "Let me see." I hesitated but handed her the phone. She scrolled for a few minutes before setting it down on the table. "They can't destroy your name, child," she said. "They can only expose their own lies. But lies left unanswered can become powerful. You need to fight this, wisely." That's when she called Marcus Bennett again, the lawyer who had helped me secure my financial independence. He met with us 2 days later at a small cafe near town. He was calm, professional, but I could tell by his furrowed brow that he took this seriously. "Naomi," he said, "this is defamation. And it's not just a social media issue. These claims can affect your career, your credibility, even your child's future. But we're going to handle this carefully." He advised me not to react emotionally or post anything out of anger. "Let them shout," he said. "The truth will whisper louder when you show evidence." He asked for every document I had, bank transfers, receipts, medical bills. Anything that proved I had been supporting them, not the other way around. For hours, we went through files, printing statements, highlighting payments. Seeing it all laid out like that, the thousands of dollars I had spent on them, the sacrifices I'd made, it was like looking at my own life in numbers. "You've carried them," Marcus said quietly, shaking his head. "And now they want to bury you under their lies." He drafted a formal cease and desist letter warning my mother and sister to remove all defamatory content or face legal consequences. But he also suggested something else. "Naomi," he said, "sometimes the best defense is the truth. You don't need to fight fire with fire. You fight it with light." That night, I sat with Grandma in the living room, the TV muted, the world outside still. "You're thinking about posting, aren't you?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I just want to tell my side." She smiled faintly. "Then tell it. But make sure it comes from your heart, not your hurt." For the next few days, I thought carefully about what to say. I didn't want to insult or accuse. I wanted honesty, the kind of truth that doesn't scream but still pierces through the noise. When I finally hit record, my hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I started by introducing myself. "My name is Naomi Brooks, and I'm not here to fight. I'm here to share my truth." I explained calmly and clearly that I had moved back home after losing my husband, that I had paid all the bills, covered my mother's medical expenses, and supported my sister through school. I showed proof, receipts, transfers, pay stubs. Then I said the part that mattered most: I loved them more than they ever knew. And when I left, it wasn't to hurt them, it was to save myself and my child. Because love without respect is not love at all. When I posted the video, I didn't expect anything. I didn't refresh for views or comments. I just went outside, sat on the porch, and watched the wind move through the trees. For the first time, I felt free of the need to explain myself, but the world, it seemed, wasn't done listening. Within 24 hours, my video spread faster than I imagined. People shared it, commented with messages of support, and started questioning Loretta's story. Screenshots of her earlier lies began circulating with my proof attached. By the end of the week, her page had gone from filled with sympathy to flooded with criticism. "You used your daughter," one comment read. "Shame on you." Keisha tried to defend her, but it only made things worse. The more they spoke, the more the truth shone through their cracks. Marcus called me 2 days later. "It's over," he said simply. "They've taken down the videos." I didn't cheer or cry. I just exhaled. "Thank you," I whispered. He chuckled softly. "You don't need to thank me, Naomi. You did the hardest part, you told the truth." When I hung up, I looked over at Grandma, who was sitting by the window knitting. She looked up and smiled knowingly. "See?" she said. "You didn't need to shout. You just needed to stand." That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace that wasn't fragile. My reputation, my dignity, my voice, all the things I thought I had lost, were mine again. The storm was over, and for once, I wasn't the one drowning. I was the one standing on solid ground, holding the quiet triumph of truth in my hands. In the weeks that followed, my life began to change in ways I hadn't expected. The storm that my mother and sister had tried to create finally quieted, but its aftermath left the air clearer than ever before. People who had once pitied my mother started seeing through her act. The messages of support I received were overwhelming. Strangers from across the country writing to me, telling me they saw their own stories in mine. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. My social media inbox filled with messages from women who had endured the same kind of emotional slavery, giving everything to family who only knew how to take. Some shared their pain in long paragraphs, others in simple words like, "Thank you for speaking what I never could." It was humbling, almost surreal. I hadn't meant to start anything larger than myself, but the truth has a way of multiplying once it's set free. Meanwhile, my mother and Keisha vanished from the spotlight. Their pages went quiet. The woman who had built her identity on dramatics suddenly had nothing left to say. I didn't hate them, I was done with hate. I simply didn't care anymore. I had given them enough of my life, they would get no more of my peace. But not everyone took the silence lightly. One afternoon, while I was out grocery shopping with Grandma Gloria, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of my old house, my mother's front porch, followed by a single text, "You think you've won?" My stomach turned cold. Grandma saw the color drain from my face and asked softly, "What is it?" I showed her. She frowned but didn't panic. "Ignore it," she said firmly. "Desperate people will always try one last trick before they finally fade away." I deleted the message and blocked the number. And strangely enough, she was right. That was the last I ever heard from them directly. Instead of letting the fear linger, I focused on rebuilding my life. My work began to flourish. My employer noticed my dedication and offered me a promotion to senior accountant. It was the first time in years that someone acknowledged my worth without taking advantage of it. When my first bonus arrived, I didn't buy anything expensive. Instead, I opened a small savings account for my unborn son. It felt symbolic, a promise to myself that his life would begin from love, not debt. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees, Grandma joined me, her soft shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "You've changed," she said after a long silence. "There's strength in you now that wasn't there before." I smiled faintly. Maybe it was always there, I said. I just needed to stop apologizing for it. She nodded, a proud smile tugging at her lips. That's the spirit your grandfather used to talk about. The kind that bends but never breaks. A few days later, something unexpected happened. A local online magazine that had seen my viral video reached out, asking if they could interview me for a feature on women's resilience and family dynamics. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't looking for attention, I just wanted peace. But Grandma encouraged me. Sometimes, she said, your story can be someone else's survival guide. The interview went live a week later under the title, The Accountant Who Bought Her Freedom. It was honest, raw, and written with compassion. It didn't vilify my family, but it didn't excuse them either. It spoke of love, loss, and the courage to walk away from what breaks you. The response was incredible. More messages, more stories, and even a few job offers from companies who admired my resilience. I realized then that pain, when faced head-on, could be transformed into something powerful. But perhaps the most moving moment came 2 weeks later. I received an email from a local women's shelter, asking if I would consider speaking to a group of women who were rebuilding their lives after financial and emotional abuse. I didn't hesitate. When I walked into that small community room filled with women of all ages, their faces marked with both pain and hope, I felt something shift inside me again. I shared my story, not the online version, but the real one. The tears, the exhaustion, the guilt, and finally, the freedom. When I finished, a woman in her 40s stood up and said, "You made me realize I don't have to apologize for leaving anymore." That was when I understood, survival wasn't just about living. It was about helping others learn how to live too. As the months went by, the noise around my name died down. The lies had been replaced with truth, the shame replaced with dignity. My belly grew rounder with each passing day, and every time I felt a kick, I smiled. That tiny heartbeat reminded me that the world could still be kind. One evening, while cleaning the living room, Grandma found something tucked inside one of her old albums, a photo of my mother as a child, holding me as a baby. She handed it to me quietly. I stared at it for a long moment, remembering a time when my mother's hands had been gentle. "Do you miss her?" Grandma asked. I thought about it before answering. "I miss the idea of her," I said softly. "The mother I wanted her to be. But the woman she became. I've made peace with letting her go." Grandma nodded. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about saying, "It's okay." It's about saying, "I'm done carrying it." That night, I lit a candle by the window, placed the photo beside it, and whispered a quiet prayer. Not for reconciliation, but for release. And in that moment, something inside me truly healed. The burden of trying to prove my worth to people who never wanted to see it was gone. I no longer needed their apology. My life wasn't theirs to define anymore. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the curtains, I opened the window and breathed in the crisp air. My phone buzzed, another email, but this time it wasn't from a stranger or a journalist. It was from my company confirming my maternity leave approval and a handwritten note from my manager. "We're proud of you, Naomi. Take care of yourself, you've earned this." As I read those words, I felt tears rise, but these were different from the ones I used to cry. These were soft, warm tears of gratitude. I looked down at my growing belly and whispered, "We did it, little one. We made it through." The truth had set me free, but it had also done something more. It had given me a future. A real one. One built not on fear or obligation, but on peace, purpose, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you truly are. Winter came softly that year, blanketing the world in a silence that felt less like emptiness and more like peace. The last leaves had fallen from the oak trees outside Grandma Gloria's house, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and snow. Inside, everything was warm. The walls glowed with golden lamplight, and the sound of the kettle whistling in the kitchen became the music of my mornings. By then, I was 9 months pregnant, heavy, tired, and yet filled with a strange serenity that I hadn't known in years. The night my contractions started, I was sitting by the fire with Grandma, reading through a stack of old family photos she had pulled from her cedar chest. She was telling me stories about my grandfather, about how they built everything they had from nothing. "We were poor," she said with a smile, but we were rich in peace. That's worth more than gold. I laughed softly, then winced as a sharp pain shot through my belly. She looked at me immediately. Naomi. I took a deep breath, clutching my stomach. I think it's time. Hours later, under the bright lights of St. Clair's Hospital, the same one where I had first learned I was pregnant, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When I heard his first cry, something inside me healed in a way words could never explain. It was as if every wound, every humiliation, every lonely night had been preparing me for this moment. The nurse placed him in my arms, and I looked down at the tiny face that carried Andre's nose, my eyes, and a future untouched by pain. "Welcome home, my little miracle," I whispered through tears. Grandma was by my side the whole time, holding my hand, humming softly like a prayer. When she finally got to hold him, she said, "This boy is the beginning of everything good that's yet to come." And I believed her. The following weeks were slow and tender. Late-night feedings, soft lullabies, and the scent of baby powder filled the house. I named him Eli, after Andre's middle name, a quiet way of keeping his father's memory close. Every time I looked at him, I felt Andre's presence, not as a ghost, but as light, steady, kind, and unbreakable. I would sit by the window, watching the snow fall, whispering to Eli about his father's laughter, his dreams, and how much he would have loved him. My days began to take shape again. Between work and motherhood, life found its rhythm, not easy but peaceful. I worked remotely while Eli napped beside me in his crib, his soft breaths reminding me of how far I had come. Grandma often helped, singing hymns while rocking him, spoiling him with knitted blankets and endless affection. Then, one afternoon, as the first hints of spring began to thaw the frost, something unexpected happened. I was at the office downtown, filling in temporarily to train new employees. The day had been long, filled with spreadsheets and numbers that made my eyes blur. I was about to leave when I heard a voice behind me, low, familiar, and hesitant. "Naomi." I turned, and there he was, Devon Mitchell, my old college friend. For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. It had been nearly 10 years since I'd last seen him, back when we were young and the world still seemed simple. He looked the same, but older, taller, broader, a calm steadiness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He smiled awkwardly. "Wow, it really is you." I laughed softly, still stunned. "Devon, I can't believe it." We ended up sitting in the small cafe across from the office, steam curling from our cups as we caught up on everything life had stolen from us. He told me he'd moved back to town after years of working overseas. He was an architect now, consulting for local projects. I told him a little about my job, my grandmother, and, eventually, about Eli. When I mentioned Andre's death, his expression changed, the warmth in his eyes deepened into something tender. "I heard," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry, Naomi. I wanted to reach out, but I didn't know how." I nodded, my fingers tracing the rim of my cup. "It's okay," I said softly. "It feels like another lifetime now." He hesitated, then asked, "And your little boy? How's he doing?" I smiled, the kind of smile that comes from the deepest part of the heart. "He's perfect," I said. "He saved me." There was a pause between us, filled with the hum of the cafe and the faint tapping of rain against the windows. Then he said something that made my breath catch. "You know, I never stopped thinking about you. Back in college, I wanted to tell you how I felt, but you met Andre, and I figured fate had other plans." He gave a small, almost shy smile. "But seeing you here today, maybe fate's giving us another chance." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. My heart fluttered, not out of romance but out of surprise, and maybe something more. After all the pain I'd endured, the idea of love felt fragile, almost foreign. But looking at him, I saw no danger, no deceit, just kindness, patience, and understanding. I looked down at my cup and whispered, "I don't know if I'm ready." He nodded. "That's okay. I'll wait. I'm not here to rush you, just to remind you that life still has good people in it." Weeks turned into months, and Devon became a gentle, steady presence in my life. He visited often, sometimes helping me with groceries, sometimes just walking with me and Eli in the park. He never pushed, never asked for more than I could give. One evening, while we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to me and said, "Naomi, I'm not trying to replace anyone. I just want to build something real, with you, and with him if you'll let me." Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at him, then at the little boy sleeping in my arms. For the first time since Andre's death, I didn't feel guilty for wanting happiness again. I smiled softly. "Maybe it's time," I said. We married 6 months later in a small ceremony under the oak trees behind Grandma's house. There were no fancy decorations, no crowds, just a handful of close friends, Grandma and Eli, dressed in a tiny white suit that made everyone laugh. When Devon took my hand and promised to love not only me but the child who had become my whole world, I knew I had finally come full circle. As the evening sun dipped low, I held Eli close, watching him smile in the glow of the golden light. Grandma leaned over and whispered, "See, child? I told you, after every storm, the sun finds its way back." I smiled, tears slipping down my cheeks. She was right. I had walked through fire, through heartbreak and betrayal, through loss and loneliness, but I had found my way out. That night, as I stood by the window with Devon's arm around my shoulder and Eli asleep in his crib, I whispered the words that had carried me through every dark day. I once thought love meant giving everything until there was nothing left of me. But now I know, real love gives back. And for the first time, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. If my story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're listening to my story from, and what time it is there right now. I'll be waiting to read your messages. See you in the next story, with a new lesson and a new hope.